Hello, welcome to Pluralsight's IT Ops News and Talk. I'm Don Jones, Curriculum Director for IT Ops Content, and this is our show for January 2016. Happy New Year! Let's start with a bit of recent industry news. Unless you work in one of the industries that relies on it, you probably didn't know that Microsoft is ending support for the Windows Embedded OS, typically used in handheld scanners in supply chain industries. It's creating a big opening for Android, which is obviously already a well-known operating system for small embedded devices. The industry hasn't really moved off the 2006 edition of Windows Embedded and does not seem poised to care about Windows IoT, which is a variant of Windows 10. A new IDG article looks at how Windows Server 2016's new per-core pricing model will affect businesses. Note that a login is required to access this URL, but the general gist seems to be up to a 25% increase for most businesses that are using more than 8 cores per socket. This comes in the wake of Microsoft's recent announcement of the licensing model change, something many in the industry have been expecting for some time. Finally, from InfoWorld comes an article from Pluralsight author Adam Bertram that'll fit well into the overall theme of our show this month. He writes about the 7 signs that you're doing DevOps wrong, and it's worth a read. He points out that, contrary to what some would have you believe, you can't buy DevOps. DevOps isn't tools, and it isn't runbooks. DevOps isn't an absence of failure, and DevOps isn't siloed IT. Have a look when you get a second. We released more than 1,000 courses in 2015, and we've already been releasing new courses in 2016. And here's a few that I want to call your attention to. First up, and one of my personal pet projects, is Help Desk Essentials, Customer Interaction. This is a great new course by 2 new Pluralsight authors, and it focuses on help desk calls between a customer and a technician to highlight good and bad practices. Even if you're not on the help desk, it's worth a watch just to brush up your skills, and frankly, it's a fun course. And if you have help desk personnel in your organization, get them to watch this gem of a course. Also up is Creating GUIs using PowerShell Studio 2015, The Essentials. This course focuses on the basics of using Windows PowerShell and Sapient Technologies PowerShell Studio to create graphical tools, which can be super useful for building tools that need to be used by end users, less experienced technicians, and so on. We've also got Hands-on Ansible for you, a great course that goes in kind of soup to nuts on this DevOps-friendly configuration management and orchestration platform. We'll have lots more Ansible content in the future, along with our existing and upcoming content for Chef, Puppet, Microsoft DSC, and other orchestration and configuration management technologies. And lastly, before I bring in this month's guests, I want to call your attention to some important security information. Vulnerability aggregator CVE Details, via securityweek.com, reported that Mac OS X and iOS registered the most publicly disclosed vulnerabilities of any operating systems in 2015. It's crucial to note, however, that none of these were viruses per se, and that's important, because Apple-targeted viruses remain rare, but consumers and end users tend to equate that with a general Macs are more secure feeling, which isn't the case. Apple logged 384 flaws against OS X and 375 against iOS, while the much-maligned Adobe Flash plugin logged only 314, and Adobe Air came in at 246. Security flaws, which are nearly always the result of coding problems, are a distinct and sometimes more concerning threat than viruses generally, although malware is often deployed to exploit those security flaws. It should give you some comfort, though, that most of these vulnerabilities were disclosed by security researchers and were not known to have actual exploits in the wild. Hit the URL for more details. Also from Security Week comes news that everyone's favorite cable company, Comcast, continues to be plagued by flaws in their Xfinity home security systems. The systems, which use the Zigbee protocol to communicate with wireless window and door sensors, can be tricked into thinking the sensors are all secure when in fact someone has broken into the house. Exploiting the vulnerability requires little more than a piece of tinfoil. CERT reported the problem to Comcast in late November and doesn't believe a workaround is possible. It's a good example of how difficult it can be to design truly secure systems, and Security Week's article notes other systems which have had problems. I had a chance to catch up with Adam Bertram on the phone the other day. We had a great talk about what he's been up to in the PowerShell world, and I think you'll enjoy some of what he had to say. Let's take a listen.
Joining me now is Adam Bertram. Adam is a Pluralsight author. He's done a lot of courses for us on Windows PowerShell. He's a Windows PowerShell MVP. Spent a lot of time kind of evangelizing and consulting and training around the whole concept of automation. Adam, welcome to the show, and start by, I guess, telling me a little bit about your most recent Pluralsight course.
Well, thanks, Don. Well, my most recent PowerShell course is on PowerShell Advanced Functions and Modules. And really what that course is all about is it's kind of a follow-up to my other course before that called PowerShell Toolmaking Fundamentals. What I found in that Toolmaking Fundamentals course was that it was about building tools, but I didn't really go into a lot of detail on the constructs of the language. So I didn't go into details on what makes an advanced function, or how do you build modules, how do you build code that can be shared with others. So this course is all about a soup to nuts, going from what's a basic function in PowerShell, going into what makes an advanced function and the capabilities that an advanced functions can give you, such as pipeline input, parameter validation. I go extensively into parameter validation. And then finally, I teach you kind of a soup to nuts about building and exploring modules. So we'll go into the different types of modules for IT pros, like script modules, and how to build a manifest module, what are some kind of uses around manifest modules. And finally, I go into actually building good help content, so comment-based help, XML help, and that sort of thing.
So I'm going to kind of lead up to a point, but I think I want to start by, kind of taking what you just said, the idea of building functions, advanced functions, modules. It's really a lot to learn, and do you see people do a lot wrong? In other words, why can't I just hop on the Google, download a couple of examples, hack them together? Do people get themselves in a bad place when they take that approach? Is there like a reason to start over? Is PowerShell really that much different from a batch file or VB script?
Well, this is kind of the approach that I actually did, that probably a lot of people do when they're first starting out, tinkering around. Well, I have a problem. I do a Google or Bing search, whatever you have, and they find, you Google how to stop a service, and maybe it's an old article, and they see something in VB script, like, oh, okay, well, I'll just take that and run with it. Well, then they Google again or something and find another piece of code snippet out there that maybe this one's PowerShell. Like, well, I need to stop a service, and I need to maybe read a text file. Well, I have a PowerShell and a VB script. Well, these aren't going to work together. And then I think the more that they kind of figure out how all these pieces do not fit together, if they're just downloading a script snippet, eventually you're going to get to the point where if you do this enough, you see the benefit of automation. You're going to see that that it's not worth trying to piece all these disparate snippets around, and eventually figure out, you know what, I'm just going to figure out how to do this myself and how to build these tools from the ground up. And eventually you get to the point where if you go through a lot of courses and do a lot of research and do some trial and error, you eventually get to the point where you really don't even need to go to a search engine, or even go to, you can just depend on PowerShell's help, and you can start building these tools from the ground up, which is customized to exactly how that you need to solve your problem.
So I guess my take is that the industry with PowerShell, so I mean, PowerShell turns 10 in November of 2016, so it's 10 years old, and the audience to me seems to have matured a little bit, but it seems to have gotten broader. Like 10 years ago, obviously everybody was a beginner. And now there's obviously some real experts out there, as well as new beginners, because there's always new people coming into the field. How would you kind of characterize the relationship of the audience with PowerShell? Do you see people kind of treating it more as a profession? Do you still see a lot of people struggling to kind of pick it up through Google? What are you kind of running into out there?
Well, in my involvement in the community, you kind of see all ranges. See people just starting, but you're always going to have that. But one thing that I'm really seeing is, since Microsoft has really encompass PowerShell support in so many of their products, almost all of their products now, and the fact that you can so easily develop PowerShell scripts to interact with APIs. For now, in PowerShell v5, there's even built-in commandlets to, God forbid, configure network switches, which the network administrators probably, I don't know if they like that or not, but PowerShell support is prevalent. You can use PowerShell scripts to just about anything these days. And another thing I wanted to mention, I'm on Twitter a lot, and I follow a lot of PowerShell people and just the PowerShell keyword. And one thing that I haven't been seeing years ago was actual jobs around PowerShell as a core requirement for the job. I've seen just today, I see jobs, PowerShell DevOps engineer, or I need a Windows administrator with PowerShell skills. PowerShell is becoming, especially in the Windows world, PowerShell is becoming a crucial skill for you to have that employers are actively seeking.
Now, that's kind of an interesting take, because obviously at Pluralsight, we want to help people do better with their career and their lives. So let's say I'm relatively new to PowerShell. Maybe I've taken one of the fundamentals courses or read a book on it. I'm enthused by it. I like it, right? I'm excited. What are some of the other skills that you think I need to pick up so I can start aiming myself toward one of those jobs that does focus on PowerShell pretty much as a full-time thing?
Well, I think if you've maybe picked up a fundamentals book and you know the basics and you really like the automation aspect of it, what you need to do is first realize, from what I've seen, the huge majority of the jobs out there are not just straight PowerShell. It's normally, I need a AD admin with PowerShell skills. I need an Exchange admin with PowerShell skills, because PowerShell is spread across the entire IT ecosystem. PowerShell is a tool that can be as a complement to many of these other big tools like SharePoint, SQL Server, Active Directory, the cloud stuff, Azure, AWS. So I don't know if it's ever going to be actually a core principle. There's a few jobs out there. For example, I'm a PowerShell developer. There are PowerShell developers out there, but what you need to realize is you need to first, if you get a job as let's say you're a Windows sysadmin, and your company may not see the benefits of automation and scripting. They may still be deploying servers one at a time and treating their servers like snowflakes, as unique entities that require they go in, click next to the installs, configure the register keys, go through a big checklist of things. What you need to do as somebody that really sees the value of PowerShell automation is, if you would get a job as a system admin that maybe the PowerShell skills aren't required, but you do have those skills, go into your employer, figure out, get an assignment, have a problem, and then take that problem, and instead of doing it how the boss wants it, maybe the boss doesn't see the value of PowerShell now, but maybe if you truly believe this is the way to go, I recommend doing it at work, scripting whatever it is with PowerShell, taking a little bit more time to automate it, and then show the boss how that works. Or if maybe kind of a slower moving organization that says, well, I don't care, just do it how we've always done it now, then maybe if you can have some time, spend some time at home, learn how to do that at home, and then take it to the boss the next day and say, hey, look at this. I've scripted it out. Look, I can just click this button or type this keystroke, run this script, and we can do it over and over again. And eventually, even the slowest moving organizations have to see the value of that, and then thus your value to the organization will increase as well.
Now, I know back in the day, we're talking VB script and batch files, one big concern that organizations really had was this idea of the script kiddies, the people who are putting together mission critical code, but it was just saved on their laptop or it wasn't really documented. It wasn't really professional. They know what professional code looks like because a lot of companies have developers, but then you've got these admins over here who are just kind of pumping out stuff. And as a boss, if you don't understand it, it worries you a little bit. So what would you say some people should do, or some practices they should maybe look at to kind of be taken a little bit more seriously?
Well, I think the whole DevOps movement has really increased lately, especially for the ops side. It's the software developers have been writing code and checking their code into source control, things like that for forever now. But the ops side is more. You're seeing more that the code more go towards the ops side. So PowerShell was a big proponent or a big starter of that, I believe, because as the ops guy, the sysadmin started using PowerShell, like, wow, this is easy to use. They started automating everything they can, and then eventually, just like you said, you get a bunch of scripts everywhere, and you don't remember what goes where, or you have this script that's sitting out on a server somewhere that nobody realizes running some scheduled task or something. You don't have any kind of organization. What I'm seeing is that even if the ops side, even if you have to kick them, you have to drag them by their hair, kicking and screaming. I'm an ops guy. We all have to learn code now. We're not necessarily going to be software developers, but we need to be coders. Script, even if you don't think so, a PowerShell script is actually still code, and we need to treat it as such. And we need to take some of the principles that software developers have been using for a long time, such as source control, testing, organized code rather than just kind of creating these one-off ad hoc scripts. So that means writing a script, checking into source control, sharing it with the team, going through testing procedures, doing real actual software. I go air quotes software development in order to deploy servers, to just manage all that infrastructure.
One thing I've always kind of noticed about developers and contrasting them to operations folks is developers are typically more involved in some sort of community. Either they're really active on a website, or maybe they've got a local user group, or they attend conferences, and they tend to go to the same ones where they meet up with people. Tell me about the role of not only community existing, I guess, but the role of actually participating in community as an importance both to your skill set and your career.
Well, I can tell you as an IT pro as of, how's it been now, like 17 years or so. As of just maybe the last year or two, I was just a system administrator, an IT pro that I just stuck to myself. I was a geek. I loved technology. I loved what I did. But eventually, I was one of those guys that would go to a conference. I would sit in the back of the room. I would never talk to anybody. I wouldn't really get anything out of the networking aspect of conferences. I would go because I love the technology, but I didn't necessarily like the people. That is until I got to a point in my career where I'm like, this is it's kind of lonely. I'm seeing all these other people out there, which I'm sure that I've seen countless and countless sysadmins, the stereotypical sitting in a dark room, not with a single light, not talking to anybody. They're just too busy pecking on the keyboard to really get involved. But what I found personally was when I started getting involved in the community, just maybe over a year and a half, 2 years ago, started really sharing things. I started blogging about a lot of things. What I found was it's amazing that what you can find in other people, what you can learn. Not only is I'm a big proponent of blogging, especially. Blogging, not only, even if you don't want to do it for other people, you do it for your documentation. But I kind of fell into this because I started blogging, answering some questions on forums, and getting involved and I think that there's a lot more people out there looking for answers than there are giving answers. And I think it's important once you eventually get to a point in your career where you have enough experience that you're able to contribute to the community and can kind of give back. It really gives you a sense of belonging and giving back. And also, I still love the emails and tweets now that your script that you wrote that I've probably forgotten by now that I contributed years ago on my blog that saved me. I got a promotion, or my boss really liked that. It's a really rewarding feeling to be able to to give back and to share your value like that.
Yeah, I can definitely see that, and I hope I think you phrased that really well. I hope that a lot of people can kind of take that. I mean, I myself, back in the day when I was just running Exchange servers, it was pretty much the same way. I sat at my desk, just kind of minded to myself. But you definitely put your career somewhere else when you start to get involved. So I hope people take that to heart. And I kind of brings us to the end of our time, but I wanted to thank you for being here. Any kind of last words you want to leave people with? Anything they should be looking forward to from you on Pluralsight anytime soon?
They can follow me at Twitter. I'm AD Bertram on Twitter quite a bit. I blog adamtheautomator.com. And I just signed up for a new course today. I'll have a new one on building a client troubleshooting tool. It's all going to be PowerShell. I'm actually going to, God forbid, do a little bit of GUI stuff this time. So we'll see how it goes.
All right, great. Adam, thanks for being with us, and we will talk to you later.
All right, thanks.
And now let's talk to JP Toda. JP is a recovering enterprise consultant, it says in his Pluralsight bio, now working in the software as a service products world. His Pluralsight courses to date have been all about Elasticsearch. So I guess we can start with, what the heck is Elasticsearch, and why might my company be using it?
It's a perfectly fair question, Don, and thanks for having me on. Elasticsearch is a distributed full-text search engine, and I'll sort of just break that down. Distributed being that it's very easy to scale. You can have one Elasticsearch node or many Elasticsearch nodes, and as you add them, it's very easy to add them to a cluster, and they will discover each other, or you can change the settings to discover each other, and they will automatically rebalance the work and the data between them so that you get the benefit of having two nodes instead of one node, or however many nodes you want. The purpose of having Elasticsearch is that you can index document data. They're stored in a JSON format, and you can search on it very, very quickly, and with different types of analyzers that let you break the data down in different ways so that it's more easily searched. You can use different dialects, different languages, or search, for example, code errors using analyzers that will pick off relevant parts of code errors that you've described.
So is this something that any organization might deploy just as an intranet search option? Is it something more specific to developers?
An internet search option, intranet search option is actually a great idea. So if you have some kind of internal knowledge base, it would be good for that, because the searching is so good and so fast. Developers often use Elasticsearch as the document section of an application. So for example, if you had like a blog engine, you wanted to store your blog posts and make them easily indexable and searchable, you could use Elasticsearch. For example, developers also use a lot for storing logs. So you can create daily or weekly or monthly indexes or indices of log data from your applications. And that makes it easily searchable and also easily graphable with some graphing tools to put in front of Elasticsearch.
So how hard is it to spin this up? Let's say I'm intrigued. I've got the software in hand. What kind of skills do I need to have already to get this thing working?
Sure, fair question. Well, Elasticsearch runs on Java, so you'll have to have the Java runtime installed on either your desktop or server. Then what you can do is simply download the Elasticsearch binary, the zip file from the Elasticsearch website. It's free, it's open source. You'll unzip that onto your computer or onto your server, tell it where the Java runtime is, and then you can install it as a service on Windows or as a daemon in Elasticsearch. And most of the major distributions will have a package manager, or a package that's compatible with that distribution that will do the installation for you. Then to interact with Elasticsearch, it's all over HTTP. So if you know how to use the curl command, or you can use a client like Postman that's built into Chrome, that's actually an extension for Chrome, you just simply send it HTTP requests like get and post and push to store data or search data. So if you know HTTP and you can do a basic installation, then you can get started with Elasticsearch pretty easily.
Now, why wouldn't a customer use something like this? Are there some major alternatives out there that have caught on, or do people just not know this is out there?
It's still a little bit new. I believe the project was started by Shay Bannon in 2010, so it's only about 5 years old, well, going on 6 years old, I imagine. If you didn't have the skill set, maybe a modern HTTP skill set, you might not be interested in using it. If for some reason you didn't want to use Java on your servers, maybe you wouldn't want to use it. If you were already invested in another document database, such as MongoDB or maybe Cassandra or something like that, then there might not be a good reason to broaden out the skill set needed to administer an Elasticsearch cluster. But otherwise, I think it's a pretty low barrier for entry, and you get a lot of return on your investment there.
So what are some of the other things that you see kind of, I mean, this feels like it's something that's maybe on the edge where people are just starting to discover it. What are some other technologies that you're personally interested in that you see in that same position?
That's a great question. In that same sort of vertical space, I would say CouchDB is also competitive in that area. Cassandra, although I don't have a lot of experience with it, is also competitive in that area. Documents like that. And then, of course, on Azure, there's a document DB, and they have a search capacity to that, which is actually backed by Elasticsearch. So Microsoft is pretty heavily invested in it too. Those are the sort of type of competitive alternatives to Elasticsearch, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, and I guess that's good to know too. I'm kind of also curious as to, outside of that database space, what sort of fun things are happening in the world that you're personally kind of keyed into.
Lately, I've been into a lot of DevOps related things. My current task at the place I work at, called eMoney Advisor, is to implement an orchestration framework, and I happen to be using Chef for that. So I'm really interested in automating and taking a hands-off approach to server administration as much as possible. So we have a sort of a fairly, it's not fair to say manual process, but I'm trying to automate as many server processes as we have right now. We have a very Windows-centric environment, and Chef and other tools like Ansible are good at orchestrating Windows environments, and that's just something I'm really passionate about. I've sort of been bitten by the DevOps bug and all things automation, so that's an area that I've been pretty hot on lately. And also trying to integrate Elasticsearch in that cause too, mostly for logging purposes and putting tools like Kibana in front of it to graph server performance.
DevOps is a huge thing for me as well. What are some of the, I guess, a layer up from the actual technologies, what are some of the problems you see organizations kind of running into and trying to deal with as they move into a DevOps stance?
So I guess some of the challenges are shaking off some of the old practices, but then also scaling what we have right now, scaling our processes. So right now we have a fairly manual approach to things, and as our products grow and we have more and more servers and more virtualization, and it's easier and easier to put up servers, administering them becomes a greater and greater problem. It's almost simply a problem of scale. So the more orchestration that I'm able to implement, the easier it is to administer all those servers all at once. So imbuing that skill set onto all of our other operations staff is, I think it's not a challenge that I face right now, but it's something I'm looking forward to doing because they're also eager to learn how to do this stuff.
Are there any cultural hurdles that organizations kind of commonly run into when they start looking at DevOps? I mean, I know part of the move fast can be a little scary sometimes.
Sure, yeah, and most of the resistance I've run into before has to do with sort of the idea of IT operations and developers sort of getting closer together and figuring out where their roles sort of mesh and how they can help each other without stepping on each other's toes. So it's the IT staff wanting to implement limits and best practices on the developers so that everything can be managed properly and correctly, and the developers wanting to work with IT to say like, hey, look, there's some alternatives to an orchestration frameworks here that we can use that require a little bit of code and organization, and we can help you get that set up. We teach you a little Ruby or teach you a little YAML for Ansible, and hey, look what happens. Look at how much time you don't have to spend manually administering all these servers. And I think that's sort of the challenge that a firm that is moving towards a more DevOps approach to things may often have.
Now, away from the organizational level, let's say you're an IT person who's been in maybe an old school style organization with the way IT is managed. What should you be learning? What are some topics and technologies that you should line yourself up for in 2016 so that as the DevOps movement comes to you, you'll be ready?
Fair, that's a great question. I think I would look into some of the more popular orchestration frameworks like Ansible and Chef, and I would also make sure that my PowerShell scripting is up to snuff, not only for administering Windows components, but also for making API calls and doing a little bit more developer-focused things. You can get a lot out of Active Directory and automate a lot of practices that way. And also in terms of Chef, I would try to pick up some Ruby. You don't have to be a Ruby expert, but pick up some Ruby so that you can write some good Chef recipes, or at least understand how to read Chef recipes so that you can put them together into cookbooks that make sense for your organization.
So it sounds like the answer is if you've not been an administrator who has a little bit of coding expertise, you need to fix that.
I would look into that. I don't think an IT person needs to learn JavaScript and all the frameworks and understand exactly how some of that stuff works, but there's a lot that learning some code will offer you in terms of making your life a lot easier and you're able to administer your servers in a more automated fashion. It could save you a lot of time.
Cool. And I guess before I let you go, is there anything we can look forward to from you on Pluralsight in the near future?
Yes, great question. Two areas that I'd like to focus on. One is I've been learning a lot about Ansible and how to administer it on Windows. And I would very much like to sort of bring that knowledge to Pluralsight and help sort of distribute that knowledge out to the Pluralsight users and watchers. And also, at some point, I would like to focus on an Elasticsearch developer course. I've covered an intro to Elasticsearch and then also how to administer and build out an Elasticsearch cluster, but I haven't really done anything on the developer side of things. So perhaps a course about developing an application, maybe an ASP.NET application with an Elasticsearch backend, something like that. But immediately, I would like to focus on the Ansible business for Windows and sort of tell that story about how to get started with it, and then ultimately how to go about your day-to-day operations with Ansible on a Windows-based network.
Well, I look forward to it. I'm sure a lot of people do too. And thanks for joining us today. Appreciate your time.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Don. I really appreciate it.
And now it's my turn. I've been frustrated recently by how many companies have tried to seize hold of the term DevOps to describe their tools and services. DevOps isn't a product, and it isn't something you can buy. So I wanted to take a moment this month to describe exactly what DevOps can look like, at least in one kind of scenario. Now keep in mind that the point of DevOps is to shorten and smooth the path between programmers and the consumers of whatever those programmers are coding. That might be users or other services or whatever. Ops, operations, is a middleman, often tasked with making sure that everything runs reliably. Working together, or DevOps, if you will, lets developers and operators work together more smoothly. For example, consider a classic environment where developers work in a development environment. They've likely got servers, probably virtual machines, where they test their code. Often, in the course of development, a developer will decide to add some new code library or other dependency to their application. So they add it. Then they recompile their application, deploy it to that test machine, and see if it works. Perhaps it doesn't. Perhaps they've missed some other dependency. So they add that dependency and try again. Eventually everything works, but maybe they haven't done such a good job of documenting what all they added. That creates problems when operations tries to deploy the application in production, and it can create problems for other operational concerns like disaster recovery planning, high availability, maintenance, patching, and so on. DevOps assumes a different approach. Developers aren't given a fixed server or a set of servers to test on. Instead, as part of their program code, they create some kind of document that describes their application dependencies. In the Microsoft world, this might be a partial desired state configuration document. In Amazon Web Services, this might be an Elastic Beanstalk environment file. But operations has configuration concerns also. So they create one or more configuration documents, perhaps describing network configurations, firewall configurations, and so on. Keep in mind that nobody's configured anything on a real machine yet. They're simply describing their desired configuration in an eventual environment. When the developer is ready to test, they push a button, perhaps even within their development toolset, and automation routines set up by operations spin up a new test environment. Those routines consume the configuration documents created by both the developer and by operations configuring the new environment. The routines deploy the application to that environment, and the developer begins testing. This environment might be a virtual machine, it might be a container, it might even be a physical server being rebuilt from scratch each time. It doesn't matter. But once it's all set up, the developer tests the application. If they find anything wrong, the test environment is decommissioned and destroyed. The developer fixes their code and perhaps modifies their configuration document, and then they try again. This process, which isn't that different from compiling and deploying an app, although it might involve a bit more time, continues until the developer is happy. And incidentally, this whole process is one reason why containers are becoming so popular. They let us spin up test environments like this much more rapidly so that developer productivity isn't impacted so much. Once everything is working, the application is ready to be deployed into production. Everything operations needs to know about the environment configuration is already known, already tested, and already validated. There's almost no room for error, and the entire process can be automated quite easily. As developers move to faster release cadences, perhaps using project methodologies like Agile, this kind of test to production process lets those faster releases be moved into production both more quickly and more reliably. And that's what DevOps is really all about. Sure, not every scenario is going to look exactly like this one, but that's the basic gist. Now, obviously, there are tools and services that can help make some of those steps easier to automate, and that's where vendors can certainly have a part to play. But nobody can sell DevOps to you on a DVD or in a download. DevOps is a way of working, and it's very much a cultural change for most organizations. Tools are important to implementing it, but tools have nothing to do with adopting it. Of course, that's just my perspective. I hope you'll share yours, and you can reach me on Twitter @ConcentratedDon. And that's our show for this month. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you'll check back next month for more of Pluralsight's IT Ops news and talk. Until next time, I'm Don Jones.